you have, seen sort of a different brand of spiritual resistance, or maybe you've been closer to the front lines of some really hard work, that a special level of spiritual resistance. And so I was saying, back when I was thinking about who would be a good person to sort of give us a view of what it's like to live out this chapter, you came to mind. So yeah, I just thought you are well versed in this area. It's a hard education. Yeah, it's a hard education, isn't it?
Yeah. I've seen spiritual warfare exist anywhere I've been.
Yeah.
I think what I settled on, and I guess the way I've framed it in my head, is I think Jesus, an incarnation, right? Like Jesus came and he's human and he met us where we are. And I think Satan is the ultimate mimicker. And I think he mimics that. And I think when you're dealing with different cultures, I think we see God act in different ways in different different cultural, places and even over generations, I think he shifts and changes as we do, and he meets us where we are. And I think Satan does the same thing. And I think that, to me, explains why we see some of the really bizarre stuff in places like Indonesia that have, a lot of really overt spirituality things. And, we live in a new island, and there's lots of blatant idol worship and sacrifices and stuff like that. A lot of physical kind of power stuff. Yeah. And I think, on one hand, we see radical healings all the time, and we see radical dreams all the time. We see God meeting people in that need. And I think we also see Satan doing some pretty gnarly stuff too. And we see spiritual warfare that feels really overt. But when I was back in the States a couple years ago, I had to go for a class, and I had this really weird experience where I hate shopping. Like, I hate shopping, right? And but I'm like, I'm going back to the States. I need to buy like some deodorant, some ranch dressing, stuff I can't get here very easily. So I had my list. I was like, I'm going to go to Target. I'm going to get it done. And that's it. And I fly into Orange County, California, which is quite a materialistic place. And within a few hours, I just had this like desire to go shopping. And I'm like, I need to buy things. I need to buy things right now,
consumer, yeah,
it's weird. And like, I'm like, I just need shoes. I don't wear anything but flip-flops in Indonesia, but obviously I really need shoes. And I remember feeling that and going, oh, this feels like it feels in Bali when I've like been in the middle of kind of a spiritual warfare situation. Like, it's the same ick. Kind of like
something outside of yourself. Yeah.
And I recognized it, and I kind of prayed about it, and it mostly went away. And I did buy shoes, confess. But when I got back on the airplane at the end of the couple weeks, it was like I flew out of something. Like, it just went away. It was weird. And I've lived in Orange County off and on for a number of years, and I never noticed it before. But I think being in Bali and kind of engaging in some in-your-face spiritual warfare type stuff made it recognizable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't think any one place necessarily has more spiritual warfare than any other geographical location, but I think Satan's really sneaky. And I think for a lot of the people of Indonesia, he keeps them captive by doing some outrageously scary things. And I think in the States, he keeps people captive by a lot of, in some ways, by not being so present. It's easy to
that's what I was saying, by not being obvious.
Right.
Because in those other places, like even in chapter 3, when we talked about Father Samaan and the Coptic Orthodox people being more open to seeing God's miracles, kind of what you're saying, like, God shows them a different facet of himself because they are tuning into that and looking for that. And so it's something that fits in their context. But I think that's really interesting to think like Satan as the mimicker of that. Well, let's go ahead and just share about, this is kind of a crazy day to talk to you, because this is, we didn't know when we scheduled this conversation back before the book club started that you were going to be at a major transition point here. I mean, you weren't sure what's going to happen, but like this is like the deciding day.
Yeah.
So tell us some of your background, what you have been doing there. I've maybe mentioned a couple things in the group before, but maybe not everybody has seen that. What have you been doing? And then what has, what's today for you?
What is today? Yeah. So my family and I lived overseas in Peru for about 5 years, just doing really traditional church planting type of missionary work. And God moved us to Indonesia to do anti-trafficking, big change of pace and switching gears. And it's been amazing. We've been here for 4 years almost. And I ended up starting an organization called Dark Bali, which is basically, it's a coalition for other anti-trafficking organizations, mostly around Bali, but around Indonesia too. And just helping to network them and resource them and, asking them what they need and then going to find it. The anti-trafficking movement is really, really young here. So, kind of getting them the resources that they need to provide good care and to work with, police or do prevention, whatever it is that they're doing. It's been super fun. I love working here and I've loved living here. It was funny because we talked about doing this and I was like, oh yeah, cool. We can talk about that stuff. It's fine. But what I didn't know what was going to happen was last October, I had this series of dreams, which is not that normal for me. It happens sometimes, but it's not like this all the time sort of thing. But I actually been praying for some dreams. I'm like, God, I need some clarity. Do some dreams. So I had this series of 3 dreams.
Like, I've lived in Indonesia long enough.
I've adapted. Right. I need some dreams. And that's actually what I prayed. I'm like, God, you give people dreams all the time around here. Like, you show up in dreams all the time. My turn. So anyway, he appeased me and I had this dream, and it was just one of those dreams. Like, I knew that there was transition, and I had this kind of miraculous event right before we came to Bali where I had like 3 people speak the same word in the same day. And I was like, well, that's significant. And God just said, I'm sending you into a season of fruitfulness, which is kind of exciting. And Dark Bali has been above and beyond my wildest expectations. Like, what we've been able to accomplish, so to speak. I just really feel like I'm, ministering out of my gifts, and I love it. And great relationships with my Indonesian coworkers. But anyway, I had this dream, and it was basically felt like God was launching me into a new season, and there was a new word, and it was, peace was really the word, and rest. Wow. Like, okay, I feel relatively peaceful. I'm happy. Okay, God, whatever, and I was just thinking maybe it was a spiritual shift or something, but we came home for Christmas just for a visit and had this weird feeling of California being home. And I've lived there off and on, but I've never particularly liked it. But I told my husband, I said, for the first time, I think I could be cool living in California, which was random. Came back, and in January, we were having some conflict in our organization, our sending organization, missions agency, not Dark Bali. And we just started praying. We're like, okay, God, what are you doing? And some of it was really hard and yucky. Some of it I feel like was just more of this process. And as we've been praying and really kind of laying before God, okay, well, there's this, what about this? And it felt like that either got totally removed or somebody else took it over, or it just kind of kept falling off the plate. And so yesterday was kind of our last fleece, so to speak. And we're like, okay, God, like, this is the last thing that is important in our community for me to take care of. And then in one phone conversation realized, oh, that's no longer even exists. And so, we decided yesterday that we were moving back to the States this summer when our kids finished the school year. So I'm like right at the end of this major decision and transition, and it's sad, and I'm kind of alternate between being really sad and being really excited because we've loved what we're doing here and I've enjoyed being a part of it. But I also know, like, it's time to pass it on to the next person and let them take over, and for me to do whatever God's going to do next. And I do not know what that is yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting as I'm, from some of our back and forth conversations in Facebook Messenger and things like that. And what you're saying right now, I'm just thinking of that verse. I think I'm mixing two verses up, but in him we live and move and have our being. And then the other verse about him, in him all things hold together. What I'm hearing you say is like, this ministry isn't dependent on my being here.
Right.
That God is lining up the people to continue the work that you've started. And you said something yesterday in Messenger about, it doesn't always need to be about, the location. It can be about the condition of our hearts. It can be a type of ministry or a cause that God has called us to, not necessarily in a certain location. So you're going to be continuing to do similar, ways that you've used your gifting there, that's going to extrapolate to your next thing. What else would you say about that? Because this chapter we've talked about, Luis and Doris went into this El Salvador civil war zone and thought like, okay, did God really send us here? And then it ended up that he did actually want them to stay physically present in that spot on the map. But that's not always true for everybody. And so I don't want anyone to get the idea that if you do sense God giving you that exit ramp, that you're following God, not that this is a prescription for everybody's life. So what else would you add to that?
Right. I mean, a friend of mine, I was talking to her a couple of days ago, and she said, God cares a lot more about where your heart is than where your feet are. And it was a really good word for me, because I can be really task oriented, and I have a tendency to think about productivity probably a lot too much. When our identity is in what we're doing, then we're going to hold on to things too tightly when we should let go. And I think even in situations like when you mentioned, when you're called to stand, if you're called to stand, not because you're called to stay, you're called to stand, you're called to press on, resist, keep going. And there have been moments when that has been true for us. But even in that, I think your conviction should come because of your identity and your sense of peace, that this is what God's called you to do. And, and you read like stories of like amazing heroes of the faith, and even, like you mentioned the story in the book, like they knew that they were called to stand because they knew within their relationship with Jesus, that's what he was calling them to do. And it was relationally based. And I think, so the issue is not, do you stay, do you go, do you stand, do you back down, do you exit or not? The issue is more, are you walking with Jesus? To me, those are kind of the bigger questions. And and I think, especially for me, I love Henry Nouwen, and he has a great sermon that talks about where people tend to find their identity is in what they do and in what people think of them and in what they have. And all of those things can get stripped away. And if that's our identity, like we live our lives kind of like this, but if our identity is just in being God's beloved, it doesn't really matter where he takes us. And it doesn't really matter if he gives us a ministry to do and then tells us to give it away, because that's just not the point. That's not my identity. My identity is not dark volley, as much as I've loved it, as much as I'll miss it. So for me, and I think being led by peace is huge. That's been the marker for me through this process. And like, we made this decision yesterday, and I had lots of emotions yesterday, but today, like, I just feel good. I just feel peaceful. And I'm like, this is right. And there's a lot to do to wrap things up and, getting the new director kind of where she needs to be to move forward. But this is right. And I have zero idea what's next. No idea where I'm going to be at, in 5 years. But I know that this is God, and I trust him, and I know he has my good in mind. And so it's going to be good.
I love how he's already taking care of things, and that you have been responsible for. Just saying, I've got this, like, it's not in you that all these things hold together. So there are lots of different kinds of troubles. Like the thing that you've been going through recently, part of it was just a sense that there might be something different for you, and added to that some conflict. And so that made you look at your situation, more closely and sift through everything more intentionally. So there are lots of different kinds of resistance. Can you tell us what are some of the other types of resistance that you've seen in your work while you have been in Indonesia? Because I know I've gotten your prayer letters, and
there's some stories.
Like you guys have been run through the ringer. And I guess while you're talking about the different kinds of resistance that you've seen or experienced, maybe say, how do you know when something is just like, coincidental, like part of being in a human body, in a place run by human beings, what kind of tips you off that, a higher level of resistance and not just something natural?
I can tell you what I've experienced. I can't say this is universal or the right answer, but one of the things that we have seen in Bali is just physical manifestations of spiritual warfare. So one story off the top of my head, I was hiking with my family down by a waterfall and had passed like an altar, and I just felt icky, like just icky, like, ew, I don't want to, and I got back on the trail. And then the next day I was just feeling like despair, like depression. And I have had clinical depression. I've been on medication. I know what that feels like. And I was like, oh no, it's coming back, and like for a couple of days it was just there, and it just like started suddenly. And I remember I was in my kitchen and I was like, God, what is this? Like, is this coming back? Do I need to call my doctor again? Cause like, I can do that. I don't like this. And I really felt like God reminded me of that feeling that I had past that altar. And I just had this sense like something came home with you. And
wow.
Oh no. So I don't know what you are, we'll go away, and like just prayed about it like out loud, and name of Jesus and all that stuff, and it was gone. Like it was gone. And so I feel like when you have those experiences, it's pretty obvious. On the flip side, it could have been like the depression stayed, and I've had that. I had 7 years on medication, and there was no spiritual aspect of that. Like, I think Satan was mean to me in that time, but I don't think
like
the depression
pounced on you and your weakness. Yeah.
The depression itself was clearly organic and related to my hormones, changed medications, and it went away. Like, wish we'd figured that out a long time ago. And so I think in some ways, to me, it's trial and error. I think, again, it's the sense of peace. And I think when you walk closely with Jesus, you just kind of get used to him, and you see his patterns, and you see some consistency in how God moves. And I think we don't focus so much on what Satan does, because I think he's really good at tricking people. Like, he's the father of lies. That's what he does.
Yeah.
And to try to figure out the liar seems kind of dumb to me. But who we do know is Jesus. And I think when you're around him and you have a sense of his presence and what he's doing, you can smell what doesn't smell right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with the depression that I had that was organic, God was like, I'm here and there's grace for today. Like, that was what he spoke to me. But when it was clearly spiritual warfare, it was like, girl, you brought something home. You need to deal with that. Like, I've, had a similar situation with my son where he was feeling really badly. He was about 7. And I was just trying to affirm him. And he looked at me in the face and he said, Mom, I can hear the words that you're saying, but there's something that keeps whispering to me. Don't believe her. Don't believe her. And I was like, oh no. And I was like, I don't know what you are, but get out of my house, get away from my kid. And I literally saw like something physical drop out of his eyes. It was weird. And then we talked and he gave me a big hug and he's like, thank you for telling me, Mom. Like, he could hear it, and before he hadn't been able to hear it. And so, we've had situations like that.
He had the discernment. He has learned that discernment by following you and your husband as you've navigated some of those things.
Right. I mean, it's such a real part of our lives, and really being in Bali a lot less before that. I feel like we've had like boot camp and this stuff. And so we've had to talk about it openly with them and try to help them hear things and hear from God and know their own emotions. And and then I think other times, I think the spiritual warfare is not so much about our situation, but about believing in God's goodness and believing he is who he says he is. And I think that can come from all sorts of different places. I don't believe there's a demon behind every bush. We have stories, but like, I think a lot of times what's more insidious than like, hit me over the head with depression
or sickness or whatever you're
exactly is just hearing lies. And so one of my first experiences with that in Bali was I was praying one day and like journaling, and I felt like God was saying, you know, you're just going to have to get used to being alone here. That's just how this is going to be. And this is like, I'm doing Bible study here, and I'm like, okay, God, like, I just need to get used to standing on my own and being alone here in Bali. And it was just really early on when we first got here and hadn't connected with the community yet. I kind of had sat with that for a few days and was just like kind of bummed. And finally I was talking about it with my husband, and I go, I don't think that was God. I took it as, you know, you need to firm up and it's going to be okay. You're going to make it, but you're going to have to do it alone. You know, so it wasn't even like this mean thing. But I told Dan, like, this doesn't have the fruit of the Spirit in it. I don't feel loved by this. And I don't feel like there's kindness in this, and there's not, it doesn't feel gentle. I don't have peace about this. I don't think this was God. And so I basically said, okay, I don't think that was God. I choose not to believe this. I'm like, rip that out of the journal and throw it away. And again, the sense of heaviness kind of left. And I think sometimes, you know, we hear our own voices, we hear our voices from the past, and we hear, I think sometimes Satan, and sometimes they're all mixed together. And I think, again, for me, it's about peace. And I think God's voice looks like the fruit of the Spirit. And if the voices that you're hearing or the feelings that you're getting don't match love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control, it's not God. It's just not God.
Spirit, and I think also another test that I do sometimes is the verse, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind.
Right.
You know? So that's a great reminder that to check those things with Scripture, His Word that He's given us to, you know, a filter for those things. I loved what you said too about the goodness of God and how He wants us to trust His goodness. And I was just leading in a kids group the other night, like subbing in for somebody at church. And one of the verses that they were reading, I think was Hebrews 11:2. I'm not so good with the address, but it said, it was saying, you must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who diligently seek Him. And then they paired that with the story of the disciples going in the boat with Jesus and the waves coming over, and then them saying, don't you care about us, basically?
Right.
And Jesus says, do you not have faith? And so I never noticed those two particular passages, how faith is so much about us believing God's love for us. And, you know, I've read things about that, like in Henry Nouwen and things like that, but I've never noticed it in those two particular scriptures, just that faith isn't just about like doctrines and things like that, but it's believing God's love for us, His good intentions for us.
To me, what I observe, especially in the American church, but the Western church in general, is there's such a drive for like certainty seeking faith, or I would say certitude seeking faith. Like we just want to be certain and we want to know all the things, and this is exactly what the Bible says, and there's no questions, and just stop it, people. Stop asking questions, you know? And I think, to me, that's the opposite of faith. I think faith, and you know, people say the opposite of faith is doubt, but I actually think the best friend of faith is doubt, and the opposite of faith is certainty. You can't have faith without doubt. But I think what makes doubt safe is when you know the character of God, when you know His nature is good, and that when you don't understand and this doesn't make any sense, but that He's good, you can be okay with a lot of blank space.
So when you're turning your questions toward Him.
Right. Right. And I think sometimes God's like, I'm not going to tell you that, you know, like that's not for you to know, but do you trust me? And I think He cares a lot more about the answer to that question than all of our doctrinal stuff. You know, will you still be faithful? And one of my favorite stories is from Deuteronomy 31. It's the story of Moses at the end of his life. And Moses was like such a hothead. Like, I relate to this guy, brother, solidarity.
I've actually thought about writing like a Bible study about angry moms from the angle of Moses, because I'm like, so much of what he did with those children of Israel, I have felt like how many rocks have I hit, you know? I beat somebody.
That sounds good.
Pushing my buttons. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I love the story because like Moses is at the end of his life and God's like, hey, so Moses, I want you to go like tell the Israelites what's what. And by the way, they're going to reject this message and your whole life's work of leading them into my presence is not actually going to work out. And I read this the first time, like really read it a few years ago. I'm like, dude, God is mean. Why would he do that to that poor guy? You know, like, why would you tell him that? The guy's about to die. Like, just let him die happy thinking that, like, his life work panned out.
That meant something.
And no, God doesn't do that. And so I wrestled with it for days. I'm like, God, you were so nice to Joshua. Like, be strong and courageous, Joshua. But you were so mean to Moses. But I thought about it, and I'm like, Moses, I think, struggled with questions about his identity and where his value came from. Like, this is the Exodus guy, you know, like this is the Prince of Egypt. And I think at the end of his life, God wanted him to know, like, I don't want you to be faithful to be successful. I want you to be faithful because you love me, and that's what I'm asking you to do. And so I think God took away, I think God gave him the knowledge of failure because he wanted him to know that his identity wasn't in his successes. His identity was in the fact that he loved God and God loved him, and that was all.
So it wasn't based on outcomes for him.
Right, exactly.
And like this nice, tied up, happy ending.
Right.
For him.
Right.
But it was based on the presence of God.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, and he did it. And I love Moses.
Yeah, me too. Well, you even think about the beginning of Moses' journey in the wilderness with the burning bush. And I mean, God started it right off the bat saying, I will be with you. And then at the end, as he's looking over the promised land that he's never going to get to step into, God is with him. And so,
well, and in the middle of it, God gets ticked off and he's like, I'm out of here. And Moses is like, God, do not, like, we won't go without your presence. And God's like, I'll send you some angels. And he's like, no, not good enough. You come with us. If you don't go, we're not going to go. And I love this relationship with God that Moses had. I'm like, ooh, like, who talks to God like that? You know, like,
he's like, no, you said you were going to be with me. I'm going to hold you to it. Yeah, I'm going to hold you to it.
Yep. And I love the story of Moses because I think I relate a lot to his relationship with God. And, you know, I'm a pretty direct, kind of in your face person. And that's kind of how I talk to God. Like, oh no, God, you know, and I think God humors us. And I see him humor Moses. But I think Moses' heart is so beautiful. Like, the point is not that I'm leading people out of slavery. God is that you're with me in it. Yeah. And so for me, like, as you know, been starting this thing with Dark Bali and working in anti-trafficking here, spending time with women in brothels, and, you know, really sitting with people in pretty traumatic circumstances. To me, it has never been about doing that. To me, it's been about God is doing this, and he's invited me to sit with him and walk with him in doing it, and being kind of the practical hand stuff. But the point is not Dark Bali. I think Dark Bali is good, and I think it's been a beautiful thing, and it's serving the community here. But for me personally, that's not my identity. And my calling is not to start Dark Bali. My calling is to love the Lord my God and to love my neighbor.
Wow, yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Like, it's just that. And so for 4 years, it's been do that by starting Dark Bali, leading Dark Bali, serving the Indonesian community. Next year, I don't know what it's going to be. You know, today it was, now step down. That's how I'm calling you to love me. And ultimately, that's how I'm calling you to serve your neighbors. And so I think holding the details really loosely, I think makes space for discernment. I think when we hold tightly to the outcomes, it's really hard to listen well when we've already decided what it's supposed to be.
Well, then I think, you know, we're focusing on the setting, the characters and all that, and not the writer. And so, and that gives disillusionment. And, you know, I think that I've experienced that in the last few years, as like lots of people that I thought were like me chose very differently, you know, in cultural things and political things. I think like I've had to shift and be like focused on the writer and not the characters and setting so much. Otherwise, I'm going to be disappointed and disillusioned.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think too, seeing life as two things: a journey, which means as things unfold, God moves us on, and he can't move us to a new place until he's given us what he needs to teach us and the tools for those decisions. And so what God might have for me next, I probably had to do what I've been doing here to do that anyway. Like, it's supposed to change. I was reading a Parker Palmer book a few months ago, and he talked about life as cyclical and like mimicking the seasons. And I just thought that was so beautiful, because he said, you know, in autumn things start dying, and we're like, there's something going on here. And winter is stark and it's cold and it's dead, but there's clarity in winter. You can see further. And then, you know, in spring things start coming to life, and in summer we enjoy kind of the beauty and the fun of it. But then autumn comes again. And I think for a lot of people, because in Western culture we think very linearly, if we think of spirituality as a linear process, we get really upset when we hit a winter. We get really upset when we have a dark night of the soul. We get really upset when God feels far, because it makes us feel like we've regressed somehow.
Yes, like we backtracked,
Right. But if you think of it as cyclical, and I don't even just see cyclical, but like as a spiral deeper and deeper into the heart of God. And we go through winters, and we go through summers, and we go through winters, and it's okay. And so when you hit another winter, it's like, all right, God, like, I don't know what you're doing, but I know you're good. And I know I trust you in this. So that's been helpful perspective for me. I think even in the last 3 months, because some of it's been awful. Some of it's been like sleepless nights, lots of tears, and, you know, sick to your stomach type stuff. But I think I'm grateful that in it, I don't feel like at any one point I didn't believe that God was doing something here, that there was purpose in this. And my calling was to walk in integrity and to walk in kindness. And beyond that, whatever ended up happening was really not the point.
This is going to be one of those milestones for you, you know, like you did the work of, even though God is giving you that exit ramp, it's a form of standing your ground. And not just going by the plan that you expected.
Right.
You know, and truly seeking him and discovering what his will is for that place and for you, even if that means that those aren't going to be together anymore.
Right. So, yeah, absolutely. That's spot on.
I was thinking as we were talking about some of this stuff that even your novel that you wrote a few years ago is, you know, about that standing your ground in the midst of all of this unexpected stuff that could really rock someone's faith. And when I read your novel, I don't know if I told you this, but when I started reading it on my Kindle, I read the whole thing in one day.
Oh my God.
I was a little obsessive, but it was, you wrote it so like edge of your seat writing. It was, I just couldn't help. I was like, well, I can't go on about my day without knowing what happens to this girl, you know?
Thanks.
So can you, and I need to go and leave you a review on Amazon. I'm like 4 years late on that. So, so take my apology, but I do need to go give you one of those. Can you tell us a little bit about your novel, you know, how that was for you creatively, and if that links to any of your growth as a believer?
It's called Yielded Captive. And when we were in Peru, we were working in a very remote tribal group. And that was only like a generation past contact. And so that's kind of the setting of the book is, you know, tribal village. But the way it came about was we had some friends fellow missionaries who were in a car accident, and their 1-year-old died. And it would just like, it messed me up. You know, I had a little boy, and I was like, God, if I'm obeying you, like at the very least, aren't you supposed to protect me and protect my children? And so that was kind of like the question that I started with, you know, because I saw these faithful believers obeying God, and like he couldn't even protect their kid. And I didn't understand that. I had no theology for that. And So I started writing. I don't think I realized it, but I started writing, kind of dealing with that and asking those questions. And the story just came up because it was kind of an actual issue for our team, and like about what happens if natives attack, like there's protocols for that and stuff like this. And so like my brain was like, what would happen if, like, as a missionary, you're captured by this uncontacted tribe and the Peruvian Amazon. And then I realized as a young mom, because if I'm being honest, like if that happened to me, like I would kill myself or like walk out in the jungle and take my chances. But then as a young mom, I'm like, but if my child was with me, that changes the whole story.
Right.
If you're the only person who knows Jesus in this whole community and you have a baby, like that changes everything. And so that's kind of where the story starts, to give away the first chapter. But I think as I wrestled with it, it was a weird creative process because I'd never written anything fiction really before, and even since, like I don't know what happened, like it was just happened. But I had a vague idea about where it was going, but I kind of knew the big spots of the storyline, but most of it I didn't know. And I would write it, and then I would read it, and I would start sobbing. Like I didn't even know what I wrote until I wrote it. I had no intention of publishing it. It was just kind of my own personal, like, dealing with these questions. And my husband read it. He's like, this is actually good. And I was like, yeah. So, it ended up getting published. But I think for me, it was a question of God's goodness. And I think where I ended up with that is just like, I don't think God authors evil. That's my theology. Yeah. But I believe that he's a redeemer. And I believe that he's good. And so I choose to see that. I choose to say, like, even in the worst things, God will bring good out of it because that's what he does, And I think the story of Joseph in the Bible, like, I don't think God sent Joseph into slavery. God's not like that. Right. But if he did get sent into slavery, God's going to use that and he's going to make good out of it because that's who he is. He redeems everything. And so just, the last question, how has it impacted me as a believer? I think pretty significantly. I think it allows a lot more mystery and ambiguity and not knowing. Allows me to kind of step into stuff that feels well beyond me. Allows me to go, okay, God, I believe you're saying to go. I'm going to go and sight unseen, We actually came to Bali sight unseen. We just felt like God was saying go. And so we're like, all right, let's go. And so I think when you have an experience of God's goodness, and I think God really met me in the process of writing that book and really healed a lot of things in me, a lot of fear. I think, not that I don't ever struggle with fear, but a lot of it's gone because I know that God's good and he's redeemer.
Sometimes I think you get fresh eyes when you go through someone else's point of view.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's...
And I remember
using creativity to explore those things.
Right. And I remember being at the funeral for this little boy and sobbing my eyes out. And I remember hearing his dad basically say that. And I've seen his parents walk, the last 10 years, of having lost their son. And she almost died as well, the mom. And they said, we don't believe that this was from God, but we know God's going to use this for good. And they said that at the funeral, and it just like blew my mind. And I saw them walk it out and trust God for his redemption in their pain and in their grief. Yeah, I think that was a big kind of theme in my life. And honestly, at that point in my life, I had never worked with people with trauma before. And we were doing kind of pretty stereotypical church planting stuff. And now on this side of things, my team goes into brothels, monthly. I go and sit with these girls, some of them underage, that are being sex trafficked, and have girls cry on my shoulders and say, what do? I need to get out. And I have to say, I don't know how to help you, because I don't. There's nothing I can do. The police won't act.
And if you act like a vigilante, you could create more problems for the other people in there.
Right. And there's guards, like it's physically dangerous too. But even outside of that, if you rescue without law enforcement and prosecution, all you've done is create a seat for a new victim. And so now you have two. And so, but it's excruciating. It's awful. But I think even sitting in that space and being friends with women that are living that life. And I mean, it's God's grace that we have access. I mean, it's ridiculous and miraculous, really, that we're even allowed to go in with the permission of the brothel owners to go in and just befriend the women there. But in that space, I think being able to believe God is working and is totally for her. And I think powerfully working for her story, and seeing the beauty and the goodness of the women that I work with, and seeing them love on these other women and really hold so much pain themselves and suffer themselves to go and do what they do. You know, I work with, you know, we have some aftercare centers, and I see the staff just pouring into survivors and struggling to understand and how to deal with it. And I am just blown away by their faithfulness and how much that they sacrifice in order to love people well, being Jesus to people in a practical way. So I just see Jesus in that, and I see his goodness in that, even in like the yuckiest of yucky, because he is faithful and he is working.
Yeah. And I bet you that a lot of those women have been hearing that same taunting voice that was telling you, you're going to have to do this alone. Nobody's here for you.
Right.
You're alone. And you and your coworkers have been a physical interruption to that lie.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, I think it's just powerful to sit with somebody. And sit with somebody and say, I know, I'm sorry. You know, to have somebody acknowledge your pain is valid is huge. Yeah. And you know, to just be silly sometimes and, you know, do nails and, you know, we bring gifts and chat, and sometimes it's tears and it's crying. For most of them are young moms. Stereotypically in our area, a girl gets married around 13, has a kid the next year, dad takes off or is just kind of useless. And so this young woman, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, is obligated to provide for her child, provide for her parents. Wow. And so she starts looking for a job. She's vulnerable. She ends up in the sex industry. And so I'd say that's probably like 80% of the women and girls we've encountered are moms. And it's heartbreaking. You know, most of their kids are on a different island. They've come to Bali to work or been trafficked into Bali to work. And you know, we look at baby pictures together. I show them my kids and they show me their kids, and we talk about being mothers. And I think one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen in the brothel is there are vendors that come in selling snacks and makeup and, you know, whatever. But the vendor that gets the most attention consistently is the guy that sells baby clothes.
Oh, wow.
And like you see this vendor come in and you know, the girls freak out and everyone's, you know, playfully scrabbling over who's going to get the baby clothes. And to me, it just humanizes the whole issue. Like, I'm a mother. I get it. I get these choices that some of them have made, even knowing that they would go into sex work. And even for the ones that haven't, like the pain of being separated from your child, the need to provide for your family.
Right.
And I think dignifying that. I had one girl was crying one time and she just said, I want to leave, and I can leave. She was free to go. She said, but if I leave, my daughter will be here in 15 years. Wow. So I'm going to stay so that I can send her to school and get an education, because I never got one. And then when she's older and she has a job, then I can leave and she can take care of me. And like, I went home and just like sobbed for days, you know, and because I get it. Brothel is a small part of the ministry that I do. Most of what I'm doing is supporting different organizations and what they need, and trying to develop opportunities for women for education and job training of all sorts of different kinds, so that they have other options. Working with the police to develop just training about identifying trafficking and even investigation and stuff like that, trying to bring in some other organizations that can help with that. And they're really open to that, which is great. And there's a lot of progress to be made, but yeah, I see things moving, and I see things going forward. And I know we're at a really different place now than we were even 4 years ago. There's so much that exists now that didn't exist 4 years ago. So much networking and people, you know, sharing the load. We have a girl that will come out of a trafficking situation, and the organizations get together and say, okay, who has the best resources for this particular person? So a lot of that going on, which is amazing, you know, and sometimes she'll get something from this organization and she'll get something from that, and really sharing the load, which is a really beautiful thing, I think. And, you know, I am excited to see where it is in 5 more years. You know, I'd love to come back and visit and just be like, yeah, you guys, you're awesome. Yeah, it's exciting, and it's hard work, it's beautiful work, but the people that Dark Valley serves, the caregivers, they are just the cream of the crop. I have so much respect for them. These Indonesians, that is primarily Indonesians that we serve. There's some Western organizations, but mostly it's Indonesian, and they just jump in, honestly, a lot of them with very little training and no idea what they're getting themselves into, and they just pour themselves into it, and the pay sucks, and like they're really not getting much out of this other than they're following God too, and they're being faithful. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to watch, and it's really been an honor to be a part of it.
As we close, what would you tell people who right now who feel like there's an onslaught of resistance, whether it's, you know, some people have multiple things happening at the same time that as they're trying to serve, what would you say to them in their life and ministry as they feel like they're being bombarded with spiritual resistance?
I think clinging really tight to Jesus, like that's to me number one, and to continue talking to him like a friend. And, you know, I am an external processor, but, you know, for me, I sit down with a friend and like talk and then like come back the next day and have the same conversation, you know, until I figure out. But that's, I think, a really great thing to do with God too, and just talk and like, this is how I feel today, and this is what I'm worried about today, and this is what I'm thinking today. Like, you know, I think pressing into the Lord and I think sitting with it with him is really good and really helpful. I think especially if you're in the process of trying to discern or make a decision. And then the second thing is peace. I think God moves by leading us with peace. And when we have a peace about something, that's from the Lord. And when we're anxious and scared, it's just not. And I think for me, I don't think we should make decisions, if at all possible, until we have a sense of peace. And I'm certainly not above saying, God, like, here's the fleece, you know, like where we were a week ago was, okay, God, we are willing to stay for another 1.5 years. We're willing to go this summer. Like, we don't know what to do. We're totally committed to whatever you say. And it doesn't matter to us what the outcome is, but we just want to be obedient. We just want to be faithful, but will you help us know? Yeah. And there was a big project that would have kept me here for another 1.5 years, and fully expected it to go through. And with the conversation, it was just like, oh, that project doesn't even exist anymore. And that was kind of the thing that I was like, God, I'm willing to stay for that. And then it was gone. And it was like, just this immediate sense, like we didn't have to ask at that point. You know, we kind of looked at each other and we just said, yeah, it's time to go. Like, that was it.
Confirmation.
Right. And I think that sometimes we can make the wrong decision. And if we're filled with like anxiety and oh no, I think that was like, maybe you need to back up a step, and maybe we're not done praying. And so for me, yeah, it's definitely pressing into Jesus and letting him be just really real and present in the emotions of difficulties, whether you're in conflict or whether you're, you know, there's a physical thing, or your family's falling apart, or your marriage is falling apart, like whatever it is, or you know, your organization is crumbling, or there's financial issues, like having him present in that with you, and where you feel like you've shared your heart with him like you would have shared it with your best friend. And then secondly, waiting for his peace to make decisions. Those are probably primary for me, because I feel like they apply to pretty much anything, any kind of decision making or conflict or struggles, whatever they are.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, what you said of like going back to him, just like you would a friend, even if you're repeating the same thing you said yesterday. And back to chapter 3, I remember Leah Santoso, who's from Indonesia, she said, if I don't hear him speak, I just stay, and I just keep listening, and I just keep asking. And and just keep on. And I remember in a hard time that I had a few years ago when my mind was spiraling. And I knew it was spiritual warfare because I had experienced other emotional things in the past, and it was beyond any of that. It was just an awful lot. And I happened to be writing a Bible study at the time. So, you know, I remember one friend saying, and there were a few friends that didn't like get freaked out by me at the time. And so I confided in them. And I remember one friend saying, even if you text me the same thing, like day after day, like don't stop texting me. And that was just such a beautiful picture of those friends and a beautiful picture of what God wants us to do. Just keep asking, keep asking, keep staying by him, and don't stop. Don't start feeling like I'm a broken record and something's wrong with me. You just keep asking until you hear.
Well, and there was a page, you know, in the book from this chapter. I'll just read a quick quote because I had highlighted it. It says, when we believers inquire of God, we receive either a new invitation to walk towards something different or an affirmation of the original invitation to walk forward with greater resolve. And I read that, and I mean, I read the book a while ago, but I actually read through it again, the chapter today, and I was like, yeah, like that is exactly how it has been for us, you know, like, okay, God, like you called us here, you put it on our hearts, on our coworkers' hearts to do this dark volley thing. We can stay, we can go. You know, are you issuing us an invitation to walk towards something new? Are you calling us to stand firm in this? And I think the key is having hearts that are really okay either way. Are we open to an invitation to walk? Are we open to standing, even if it's hard and even if it's costly? And I think that's probably for me the key question. And I think, what you said, she's really wise. I think if God has called you to do something, until he's called you to do something new, you stand.
Yeah, right.
But you have an open heart to hear something new too. And you don't say, oh no, God, you're only allowed to speak once, we're done, right? Like,
exactly. Like, defining yourself by that previous decision.
Right.
And not,
Right. God moves and life's a journey and it's fine. And so I do think if God has spoken something, until he has spoken something new, we're called to stand in what he has said and what we know he has said. Right. But we listened for the new invitation at the same time, and, you know, developing a sensitivity to be able to hear both.
Yeah. Well, I have just been so honored to pray for you in this time and to see how God has been leading, and just to hear how you're navigating some really tough things. And I'm so excited for you as you move into the next thing. I'm really curious to see what happens for both you and your husband, and just see how God is going to use what he's already of the experience you already have and the things you've developed there. It's I mean, you're already ministering there and even online. I get so much from the way you think and the way you express things, and you're always helping me to dig deeper and think differently. So just thank you for that, and just thank you for sharing an authentic view of this transition point for you. And I hope those of you who've watched live, and then those of you who will watch later, I hope that you've gotten a lot from Dalaina's journey. And thank you, Dalaina, and we'll just keep up
Darcy.
on
It means a lot.
Good to chat with you, and thanks again for endorsing the book and for reading it in the middle of your one of your papers that you had to do.
It was a nice break. I didn't mind.
Yeah, and congratulations! Didn't you just finish your course? You and
also yesterday when I resigned, I graduated with a master's degree. I mean, like, it was a big day. So seminary yesterday. So turned in my last paper, and so that's really cool to get to finish.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations, and we will see you around online then.
Thanks, Darcy. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, good night in Indonesia.
Bye.
Bye-bye.